Welcome to Quinsey Art. This is Tracy Quinsey. This is the video on materials. So before you move on to video 3, which shows you how to paint, have a look at the materials for complete beginners who are painting in oil or acrylic. So let's have a look at that palette that we talked about for colors. For colors, it's really important as a beginner painter that you have a restricted palette, a very limited color palette. It's important to choose just a few colors and to stick with probably the primaries and a black and a white. If you have a moment, Google Zorn palette, because Anders Zorn was an artist who used a very limited palette. He used ivory black and vermilion, which is a red. He used yellow ochre and white. That he never used a blue, a green, etc. That was his palette. Have a look at his artwork. He did extraordinary pieces of art with just a couple of colors. So the idea that you have to have a whole selection of a variety of different colors, no, because if you do that as a beginner, you will get frustrated very quickly because the mixing of colors is a science. And it is very, very difficult to learn your mixtures if you are switching up colors and switching in colors. You will become overwhelmed. So stick to a red, a yellow, a blue, a black, and a white. Keep it simple. Because with those colors, you can mix everything that you will need as a beginner. So let's have a quick look at my palette and let me explain why I use what I use. And I hope that you, as a beginner, will also use this palette. Let's have a look. On my palette, and this is going to be the same for oil painters or acrylic painters. You're just going to buy oil paint or acrylic paint, but they come in the same colors. So starting here is ivory black, cobalt blue, alizarin crimson, cad red instead of vermilion, yellow ochre, cad yellow, and titanium white. And that's all you need, just those colors. So try to stick to these colors. Try to practice your mixing with just these colors. Let's have a look at this palette. This is an oil palette. You need a large palette because you need a big surface for mixing on. Acrylic painters, you have many different palettes out there as well. A simple one for you is just to get yourself some palette paper. It comes in sheets like that. You tear off a sheet. And that's your palette. Notice this is gray and not white because of the difficulty we have seeing colors on a white background. The other thing you can choose for oil painters You might like to have a wooden palette, and this one you can get them in various colors, and this one is a simple wooden palette, but they come in many different shades, also in grays. So have a look at that, make sure it's large. Acrylic painters, you have the added difficulty of keeping your paints wet. So I just wanted to show you this. I'm not trying to advertise for anyone, but I don't know of any other stay wet palette. So this is the system that I know about. And it's called Stay Wet, and it's by Masterson. And the great thing about it is, for acrylic painters, you have the problem of your paints drying out so quickly. So this is a system where you have a sponge, you get it wet, there is palette paper to put on top of it, you put your paints on top, and it comes in a box, and it all fits tidily in there. You have a plastic lid to put on your box to try to keep your paints as wet as possible for as long as possible. So this is a great system for you acrylic painters as well. In terms of brushes, let's have a look at some of the brushes. There are many, many kinds of brushes, and every artist has their favorite brushes. But the rule of thumb is always that if it's a big canvas that you're using, use big brushes. If it's a small canvas that you're using, use a small brush. Acrylic painters, you must use specific acrylic brushes, and oil painters use oil brushes. Sometimes they're very similar, and some stores will sell brushes that are great for both. But check with your local supply store and ask. So brushes come in many different sizes. They come in with different types of bristles. So let's have a look at a couple. Some brushes are hog brushes, and the bristles are quite stiff, and their job is to hold a lot of paint as well. They make a distinctive mark when it hits the canvas. So hog bristle brushes, if you are a thick painter, that you like to use a lot of paint, you like to make real big marks, distinctive marks, then hog bristle brushes definitely do the job for you. That's one kind of brush. This is a flat brush. There are brights as well, so flat brushes and brights. The next one is more softer. It's synthetic brushes. There's also more expensive brushes that you can get that are sable brushes, but we're not going to do that. So synthetic brushes is something that we are going to use, and they are softer. They don't hold as much paint, and the marks that they make on the canvas are much smoother. They blend in very well. So they operate different from hog bristle brushes. Also, the shape of this one is rounded at the end. Rounded at the end, and they are called filberts. So you will want to choose a filbert, and you will want to choose a flat brush. Make sure that they have long handles, because you want to be able to get away from your canvas. You don't always paint up super close. So hold your brush at the end, and you will get much looser brush strokes if you hold your brush close to the end, you have more control for sure, but you get a tighter stroke. So just think about that. Long-handled brush gives you more versatility, so choose your long-handled brushes. So that's really the basics for beginners to get started. Choose a few brushes. The one brush that I really like to have is an angled brush, and mine's a bit beat up, so you might not be able to see the angle on it, but it has an angle. It's great for making a line, and it's great for blending, and it's great for laying down paint. It's very versatile, and I use it a great deal. So get yourself an angle brush. When we go to our details, we have to have smaller brushes. So if we're going to do whiskers on a cat, for example, then we need to have a liner brush. So ask for a liner brush. There are tons of tiny little brushes out there. When it comes to details like eyes and noses, etc., and highlights, you'll need a smaller brush. So try to find one of those as well. As you go along in your painting course, you might add more brushes, and that's fine. But figure out how a couple of brushes work for you and see the differences, how much paint they hold and the stroke that you make with them. So from brushes, let's have a look at palette knives. Palette knives come in metals, plastics, they come in a variety of shapes. Palette knives are wonderful for cleaning up your palettes after you're finished. You can scrape the paint away off your palette, but they are useful tools for measuring your paint. So you can use this as a measuring tool. And when you are trying to mix a 50-50 mixture, for example, you can make sure that you have just this part covered with paint as you scoop it away from your pile and put it on your palette. And then you pick up a different color and you want another 50%, and you scoop that up and you measure that out and you put it in and mix it up. So they're great. It's a great tool for mixing. It's also a good tool to hold up when you're trying to match a color on your reference photo. So you can take a bit of paint on the tip, your mixture on your tip of the palette knife, hold it up to your reference and see if you've got that color right. So that's another great use for this. And of course, we use them for mixing. So when you're mixing paint, oil painters or acrylic painters, please don't mix them so vigorously. You're mixing the paint to death. No, you don't need to do that. It's like butter. You're very softly, gently trying to mix the colors together until they combine, and that's all. So be soft with your mixing with your palette knife, and then make sure that you clean them off thoroughly afterwards. That's the palette knives. Let's move on to our cleanup, because now that we've invested in these expensive materials, we want to keep them, and we want to keep them for years. And so one of the things for oil painters, after you finish painting for the day, you clean up your palette, you wipe it off with a paper towel, and then you go to your brushes. So oil painters, you need some linseed oil to clean your brushes off, paper towel, and give them a really good wipe and make sure you get as much paint out as possible. If you're painting the next day, great, you can just leave it. It's good for the next day, that's good enough. But if you're not painting the next day and you're going away for a while and you're not going to be painting, you have to do something else, because that paint that's still in that brush, you haven't thoroughly gotten it out, even if you think you have, You haven't. You'll come back to that brush in a week or so or more, and it will be hard as a rock, and you will have destroyed your brush. It will be very difficult to bring it back in some cases. So if you're going to go away for a while and you're not painting the next day, you need to clean it off. Acrylic painters, you will do the same thing. This is a soap, a brush soap that you buy at your local art supply store, and it's fantastic because it thoroughly gets rid of the paint. So use a really good quality brush soap and wash your brushes with soap and with water and thoroughly clean them and lay them flat to dry. Don't let your paintbrush go on the brush part because it will destroy your brush as well. So once you've finished and you've got your brush cleaned, and just give it a shape, make sure you've got the shape, and lay it flat on a surface to dry. And that's how to maintain your brushes. For the most part, those are the tools that we will be using for our series. And before we go to video number 3, I just wanted to show the oil painters something. When you finish for the day and you want to save that paint that you still have on your palette, you can, because all you need to do is scoop up your colors, put them into a plastic container, and then put it into the freezer. So it will keep. It keeps for a long, long time. So oil painters, you get to save your paint. Acrylic painters, your paint is going to dry up on your palette paper or whatever you're using your palette. And so you're just going to wipe it off, clean your palette thoroughly, and you'll have to begin the next day with laying out your paints again. So that is the basics and the materials that I use. I hope to see you in video number 3 when we actually get to paint. See you then.